So, what we're going to talk about now is a particular strike that takes place during the Gilded Age. It's called the Homestead Strike, and it involves Carnegie Steel. So, let me remind you a little bit about Andrew Carnegie, who will be a giant philosopher who comes out of this period, a guy who comes up with the gospel of wealth, a guy who will give away over 90% of all of his fortune. He will stick his money where his mouth is, and will be intent on giving his fellow man a hand up, though not a hand out. Having said that, Carnegie is a ruthless businessman that is very much par for the course in this time period. He is going to be cutthroat about a lot of things, and you could criticize him for that. It's so hard with men and women. It depends on what you're focused on. If you look at what he does with his wealth, you go, oh, he's like Santa, but in a way that understands human nature. Or you can look at what he does with labor and some of his business practices apart from that and go, oh, that's robber barony. Everyone's a mixed bag, man. Everyone. I can lift up pretty much all of our figures from US history, the names that you remember, and I can tear each and every one of them down because that's just how it works. Human beings are constantly flipping this double-sided coin. We are light and dark. We are good and bad. And some of our actions are great and worthy and memorable. Some of our actions are horrible and not worthy and memorable. Let's look a little closer at Andrew Carnegie's background. So he grew up in Scotland. His dad was a weaver, or he grew up partially in Scotland. He was born there. His dad was a weaver whose job was destroyed by creative destruction. Looms that did the work faster, cheaper, just more standard, replace a lot of the weavers in the 1800s as Britain itself industrialized, and dude was out of a job. So really, really struggling. The Carnegies actually borrowed some money, got on a ship, and moved to the New World. The point here is that this major entrepreneur has super humble beginnings. When he got to Pennsylvania, he was just a kid, but Andrew Carnegie had to help put food on the table, so he went to work in a factory as a bobbin boy. Then he eventually moved up to become a telegraph operator. He actually figured out how to decode Morse code by ear. He didn't have to write down anything, which made him exceptionally fast. And that led to his position as a railroad manager's assistant. And from there, he just keeps on climbing the rungs on the ladder in American society. He is a great American success story. And one of the reactions that Andrew Carnegie has to his own success is the idea that if he could climb up the ladder, anyone could climb up the ladder. He recognizes that people need help to get on that ladder, which is why later on he will give away so much money, why he will fund over 3,000 libraries, because he especially understood how important education was for someone who wanted to get ahead. He was actually very well served by the fact that he had access to a library that another entrepreneur in the city gave to telegraph boys, that he was able to go and just read books. And what would happen is he could then talk to men who were in a higher station than he was about things like classical literature. And it made him seem very impressive, smart, interesting, articulate. All of those things, as well as the fact that he was quick on his feet and constantly trying to do whatever it was he needed to do to get to the next rung. Now, again, he thinks everyone can get up on that ladder, and he totally believes in this individual pursuit of wealth. If you don't like what you're doing, pull up your bootstraps, young man. Just figure it out. So he's not going to be fond of labor unions. In fact, he's going to be really disdainful of collective bargaining. And even though Carnegie Steel will have labor union contracts, he's going to try and get rid of them when he can, which is why we're going to have the Homestead Strike in 1892. So essentially, you had a labor union contract that was coming up for renewal. Carnegie goes to his plant manager, a fellow named Henry Frick, and he says, "Henry, my boy, what I want you to do is have all the workers work around the clock and create a surplus of steel. And after they create the surplus of steel, which, by the way, they didn't mind because they got paid more when they were working this much, after you create this surplus of steel, it'll be time to renegotiate the labor union's contract. And what I want you to do is just cancel it." Okay? Which makes me want to ask you if you can think through, why did he want them to make a surplus of steel? Anyway, Frick and the labor union get to that point where they're sitting across the table, and Henry Frick says, "Actually, we're not going to renew your contract, and not only that, we are going to cut all of the wages of all of these steel workers by 20%. And it just so happens that Homestead, Pennsylvania was a company town, which meant that Carnegie Steel owned the houses in which the workers lived. And this was not pre-planned. This had something more to do with the market that was existing in 1892. The invisible hand kind of pushed this. But rent went up on all the houses just as they were having this huge pay cut. So let's think about that. Oh, and by the way, then they are going to threaten to strike. The steelworkers are going to go on strike. But, Henry Frick can say, "Frick you, man. I've got steel. I can fulfill all the orders because we created this surplus. So we're going to play a game of chicken. Let's see who can last longer. Me with steel that I can still use to make money, or you without money to buy food?" Steelworkers go on strike, and really the public is behind them. Who can't sympathize with what is happening to them? It's a very harsh cut. They've got everyone knows you've got to feed your babies. Your children need shoes on their feet. You've got to have a roof over your head. All of this just seems really harsh. So Henry Frick even makes things worse because he puts barricades around the company because he doesn't want any of the labor union strikers to get in and destroy equipment. They start calling this Fort Frick, and an interaction occurs between them and some Pinkerton detectives, which were essentially hired militia for hire. If you look at the Pinkerton detective logo, by the way, it looks like an eye, and Pinkerton detectives are the source for the phrase private eye, because those are detectives, right? If you're a private eye, it has a root. I love etymology. It's so much fun. The history of words, just history is so much fun. Anyway, during this violent clash, you had 3 Pinkerton detectives killed, but there were 9 workers killed. So some in the public could be more sympathetic to the Pinkertons, but a lot of the workers are killed. And all of this just seems, like a complicated thing. Public opinion is split over who is right. Carnegie or the workers? And again, they're leaning towards the workers. Enter Alexander Berkman. an anarchist, a more Knights of Labor kind of guy. So he's a friend of Emma Goldman, who, by the way, anarchy is an actual political ideology, and Emma Goldman is the mother of it. It's very complex. It's not this, just destroy things. It's much more. It's got some Marxist overtones, but it's an interesting ideology. Alexander Berkman, hooking up with Emma Goldman, mother of anarchy, goes to Fort Frick, climbs over the fence, finds Henry Frick working in his office, pulls out a gun, shoots him point blank twice. The gun is wrestled away from him, pulls out a knife. Fortunately, Henry Frick has guards. So Alexander Berkman is again pulled away, and Henry Frick on the stretcher says, "I do not think I shall die, but if I do or not, the company will pursue the same policy and it will win." You know what this violence does? It completely changes the public opinion on some level. You can't go around trying to kill middle managers just because your cause isn't going the right way. This was just viewed out as a straight up murder attempt. By the way, Alexander Berkman goes to prison for 14 years. When he gets out, he was still an anarchist. He still hangs out with Emma Goldman. Eventually, he and she are going to be deported to Russia via something called the Soviet Ark, which is something you keep in your head because I'll talk about it in the next unit. That's part of the first Red Scare. Berkman will go overseas. He'll see what Lenin is doing, which is none too kind to the people. And he will become completely disillusioned with humanity, leave Russia, and kill himself in France in 1936 at 65 years of age. Whatever, Henry Frick was right. Carnegie still won. And not only that, they crushed labor unions in the steel industry for a generation. So people today will splice and dice the actions of Carnegie Steel, but at the time, the violence that seemed to come from the union, even though Alexander Berkman was just like, he was a sympathizer, he didn't work at Carnegie Steel, it goes against them. Americans don't really love violence. I mean, we love violence. We do. We love it in our movies. We don't really love it in our causes. At least that's my thesis, and of course you can argue with it.